They say the measure of a species isn't found in their weapons or their warships, but in what they do when no one is watching. When Lieutenant Commander Varek of the Consortium Defense Fleet made the decision to knock on that door during the worst storm his homeworld had seen in 3 centuries, he had no idea he was about to discover why the galaxy's younger races whispered about humans with a mixture of fear and something else he couldn't quite name. What happened in those next 72 hours would shake the foundations of everything the Galactic Consortium thought they knew about the strange bipeds from Sol 3, and Varek would never look at another species the same way again. This is not a story about humanity's weapons. This is a story about something far more dangerous. The rain hammered against Lieutenant Commander Varek's carapace like 1,000 tiny fists, each drop feeling like a small explosion against his sensory plates. His forelegs struggled to find purchase on the muddy hillside as wind howled through the valley below, bending the native trees nearly horizontal. The emergency beacon in his survival pack had died 3 hours ago, its power cell fried when his scout ship had been struck by lightning and sent spiraling into this backwater planet's atmosphere. Now, as the twin suns finally dipped below the horizon and true darkness descended, Varek was forced to acknowledge a truth he'd never imagined facing. He, a decorated officer of the Consortium Defense Fleet, was completely and utterly lost. The planet's designation was Terra Adjacent 447, though the human colonists who'd settled here 2 generations ago called it Meadowbrook, for reasons Varek couldn't fathom. There were no meadows visible through this apocalyptic storm, and the only brooks he'd encountered were rapidly transforming into raging torrents. The humans had established perhaps 24 small settlements across the temperate zones, farming communities mostly, well away from the consortium's authorized trade ports. Varek's mission had been a simple reconnaissance sweep, cataloging the outer colonies for the updated registry. Simple, routine, boring, until the storm had appeared out of nowhere, as if the planet itself had decided to swat his ship from the sky. Varek crested another hill, his breathing apparatus working overtime to filter the rain-soaked air. His people, the Zinthari, came from a desert world where water fell maybe twice a year in brief, violent bursts. This sustained deluge was beyond his comprehension, beyond his physiology's ability to cope. His internal temperature was dropping, his movements becoming sluggish. If he didn't find shelter soon, he would enter hibernation mode, and, on this rain-swept hillside, that would be a death sentence. Then, through the curtains of rain and the gathering darkness, he saw it. A light, warm and golden, shining from a window perhaps half a kilometer distant. Varek's relief was so intense he nearly stumbled. Civilization. Shelter. Salvation. He forced his legs to move faster, though his muscles screamed in protest. The light grew closer, resolving into a modest structure, human in design. It was a farmhouse, he realized, standing alone on a cleared plot of land. Smoke rose from a chimney despite the rain, and he could see the glow of what humans called a porch light, illuminating a wooden deck. Varek nearly collapsed climbing the 3 steps to the porch. His manipulator appendages, numb from cold, fumbled with the translator unit at his throat before he managed to activate it. He raised one appendage and struck the door 3 times, the sound barely audible over the storm's fury. For a long moment, nothing happened, and Varek felt despair creeping in. Then, he heard footsteps, and the door swung open. The human female who stood in the doorway couldn't have been more than 30 standard years old, though Varek had never been good at estimating human ages. She had dark hair pulled back in what his database informed him was called a ponytail, and wore simple clothing, work pants, and a thick sweater. Her eyes, a warm brown color, widened in surprise at the sight of him. But Varek was stunned to see no fear in them. Just surprise, and then, incredibly, concern. "Oh my God," she said, and Varek's translator rendered her language into Consortium standard. "You're freezing. Come in quickly." She stepped aside, gesturing urgently, and Varek didn't need to be told twice. He stumbled through the doorway into a wave of warmth that made his sensory plates sing with relief. The interior was exactly what his cultural database suggested a human frontier home would be. Wooden floors, simple furniture, decorations that served no practical purpose but apparently pleased human aesthetic sensibilities. A fire crackled in what his translator identified as a fireplace, and the smell of something cooking made Varek's digestive system gurgle despite his exhaustion. The human closed the door firmly against the storm and turned to examine him, her hands on her hips. "You're Zinthari, right? I've seen pictures in the news feeds. What in the world are you doing out in this storm? Were you in that crash I saw earlier? I thought I saw something go down, but the weather's been so bad I couldn't be sure." Varek's translator worked to process her rapid-fire questions, and he managed to activate his vocalization unit. His voice emerged in rough consortium standard, his translator making it audible to human ears. "Yes, scout ship, lightning strike. I am Lieutenant Commander Varek of the Consortium Defense Fleet. I apologize for the intrusion. I require shelter until the storm passes, and I can signal for rescue. I can compensate you for the inconvenience." The human waved a hand dismissively, a gesture Varek's database suggested meant negation or rejection. "Compensate? Don't be ridiculous. I'm Sarah Chun, and you're welcome to stay as long as you need. Now, let's get you warmed up properly. You look half frozen, and I don't even know if Zinthari can get hypothermia, but I'm not taking chances." Before Varek could protest, Sarah was moving around the room with purpose. She grabbed what appeared to be thick fabric coverings from a storage chest and approached him. "These are blankets. Thermal insulators. Can you sit down? Maybe by the fire?" Varek's legs were trembling now that he'd stopped moving, and he carefully lowered himself onto the wooden floor near the fireplace, his forelegs folding beneath him. Sarah immediately began draping the blankets over his carapace, tucking them around his body with practiced efficiency. The warmth was extraordinary, and Varek felt his systems beginning to stabilize. "There," Sarah said, stepping back to examine her work. "That should help. Now, I'm guessing you haven't eaten. Do Zinthari eat?" "Of course you do. Stupid question. What can you process?" "I've got vegetable stew on the stove, bread, some preserved fruits. I'm basically vegetarian out here anyway since the nearest town is 40 kilometers away, and fresh meat doesn't keep well without better refrigeration than I can afford." Varek's database was struggling to keep up with her. Vegetarian. Stove. Refrigeration. His mind felt sluggish, but he managed to respond. Zinthari can process most carbon-based organic matter. Simple carbohydrates are ideal for rapid energy restoration. Bread it is, then, and some stew if you think you can handle it. Lots of vegetables, potatoes, some beans. Nothing that should upset an alien digestive system, I hope. She disappeared through a doorway, and Varek heard sounds of activity from what he assumed was the food preparation area. A kitchen, his database supplied. He sat there, wrapped in human blankets, by a human fire, in a human home, and tried to process what was happening. In consortium space, hospitality toward strangers was practically unheard of. One's dwelling was sacrosanct, protected, never open to unknown entities. Yet this human, this Sarah Chun, had taken one look at him and immediately offered aid. No questions about his credentials, no demands for identification, no security protocols. Just concern and action. Sarah returned carrying a tray loaded with items. She set it down near him, well within reach. Varek saw a plate stacked with sliced bread, a bowl of steaming liquid filled with colorful chunks of vegetation, and a large container of water. "I wasn't sure how you'd manage utensils, so I cut the bread into pieces you can pick up easily. The stew might be trickier, but there's a spoon if you can manage it, or you could maybe drink it from the bowl. I don't want to be rude about it." Varek extended one manipulator appendage and carefully picked up a piece of bread. His appendages were designed for fine manipulation, though they looked clumsy compared to human hands. He brought the bread to his feeding orifice and took an experimental bite. The texture was strange, soft, and yielding, but the taste was pleasant, and his systems immediately recognized the nutritional value. He consumed several pieces before attempting the stew, carefully lifting the bowl and sipping the hot liquid. It was extraordinary, complex flavors that his people rarely bothered with. Zinthari cuisine was efficient, but bland. This was something else entirely. "Good?" Sarah asked, sitting down in a chair near him, holding her own bowl of stew. "Very nutritious," Varek said, and saw her smile. "And pleasant. The flavor is complex." "Thanks. It's my grandmother's recipe. Well, adapted for local ingredients. But the basics are the same. She taught me to cook when I was little, before my family came out here to Meadowbrook. She ate a few spoonfuls of her own stew, seemingly comfortable with the silence that followed. Varric found this remarkable. Most species he'd encountered found silence uncomfortable, felt the need to fill it with unnecessary communication. But Sarah simply ate, occasionally glancing at him with what seemed like friendly curiosity rather than suspicion. Finally, Varric's curiosity overcame his fatigue. Why did you open your door? You could not have known who or what I was. I could have been dangerous. Sarah set down her bowl and looked at him thoughtfully. Could have been, sure. But you weren't acting dangerous. You were stumbling, half-frozen, barely able to knock on the door. And it's the middle of the worst storm we've had in years. What was I supposed to do? Leave you out there? She said it as if the answer was obvious, as if there was no other possible response. Many species would have, Varric said quietly. My own people would have, unless there was a clear advantage to offering aid. The consortium has protocols, procedures for dealing with unknown entities seeking entry to private dwellings. Sarah shrugged, a human gesture indicating indifference or dismissal. Well, I'm not the consortium, and neither is any other human I know. Out here on the frontier especially, we look after each other. Last winter, my heating system failed during a cold snap, and the Johnsons' 3 farms oversent their son with spare parts and wouldn't take payment. Old Tom Martinez got sick during planting season 2 years ago, and half the valley showed up to help get his field seeded. We survive by helping each other. She paused, then added, besides, Mom always said you can tell a lot about people by how they treat strangers who need help. Not just humans. People. Anyone. Varric felt something shift in his understanding. He'd read the reports, of course, the consortium assessments of human psychology and culture. They'd noted the species' tendency toward what they called altruism, particularly toward kin groups. But the analysts had dismissed it as a survival strategy from their evolutionary past, something that would fade as humans integrated more fully into consortium society. Clearly, those analysts had never met someone like Sarah Chun. The storm continued to rage outside, and Sarah finished her stew before standing. I'm going to check the weather reports, see how long this is supposed to last. Make yourself comfortable. There's more food if you want it, and the bathroom is down the hall if you need it. Might be a bit small for you, but the toilet should still work, and there's water for washing. She moved to a desk against one wall where a communication terminal sat, its screen glowing softly. While she worked, Varric allowed himself to truly relax for the first time since his crash. The warmth was seeping into his core now, his systems running through diagnostic checks and repair protocols. He'd been lucky. Another hour in that storm, and his implants calculated a 70% chance of catastrophic system failure. This human, this stranger, had saved his life simply by opening her door. Sarah made a sound of displeasure at her terminal. Okay, so good news and bad news. Good news is the storm is supposed to break by morning, day after tomorrow at the latest. Bad news is there's a communications blackout across this whole region. Something about the atmospheric ionization from all the lightning. We're completely cut off until it clears. I cannot signal for rescue, Varric said, understanding. Not until the storm passes, no? But don't worry about it. You're welcome to stay as long as needed. I've got plenty of space, plenty of food. It'll be nice to have company, actually. It gets pretty quiet out here sometimes. She said it casually, but Varric detected something in her tone. Loneliness, perhaps. His database suggested humans were highly social creatures who suffered psychological distress from prolonged isolation. You live here alone? He asked. Yeah. I bought this place 3 years ago with my savings. Always wanted to be a farmer, grow things, be self-sufficient. Most people think I'm crazy for living so far from town, but I like the peace and quiet. Usually. She grinned. Though I have to admit, stumbling across an alien officer in need of rescue adds some excitement to the routine. Varric found himself making the Zinthari equivalent of a laugh, a soft clicking sound from his vocalization unit. I apologize for disrupting your peace and quiet. Are you kidding? This is the most interesting thing that's happened in months. Last excitement I had was when a coyote analog tried to get into my chicken coop. This is way better. She returned to her chair, settling in comfortably. So, Lieutenant Commander Varek, what's it like being in the Defense Fleet? I've always been curious about life in space, but I've never actually met anyone from the consortium military before. And so they talked. Varek found himself describing his career, his homeworld, the duties of a reconnaissance officer. Sarah listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed real intelligence and curiosity. In turn, she told him about her life, about growing up on Earth in what she called the Pacific Northwest, about the decision to join the colonial movement and stake a claim on this distant world. She spoke about her farm, the challenges of adapting Earth crops to alien soil, the satisfaction of watching things grow under her care. Hours passed. The storm continued its assault on the planet outside, but inside the small farmhouse, warmth and conversation created a bubble of safety and unexpected connection. Varek learned that Sarah was an amateur xenobiologist, that she studied the local ecosystem in her spare time and sent reports to the colonial administration. She learned that Varek had been studying comparative cultural development, that his assignment to reconnaissance was partly motivated by his desire to understand other species better. Eventually, Sarah yawned, covering her mouth with one hand in a gesture Varek recognized as indicating fatigue. I should probably get some sleep. It's been a long day, and tomorrow I'll need to check on the animals in the barn, make sure they weathered the storm okay. You should rest too. Do Xanthari sleep? I feel like I should know this, but don't. We enter a reduced activity state for approximately 6 hours out of every 28, Varek explained. Similar to sleep, but not identical. I should enter this state soon. Okay. Well, you can stay here by the fire if that's comfortable, or I can set up the spare room if you prefer privacy. It's got a bed, but I don't know if that would work for your physiology. Might be better to stay in here where it's warmest anyway. Here is adequate, Varek said. More than adequate. You have been exceptionally generous, Sarah-chan. She smiled at him, and Varek was struck by how expressive human faces were, how much warmth could be conveyed in a simple arrangement of facial muscles. Just Sarah is fine. And you're very welcome, Varek. Sleep well, or rest well, or whatever is appropriate for Xanthari. She disappeared down the hallway, and Varek heard the sound of a door closing softly. He arranged himself more comfortably on the floor, the blankets still wrapped around his carapace, and allowed his systems to begin the shutdown sequence for rest mode. As his consciousness faded, his last thought was of how profoundly wrong the consortium's assessments of humanity had been, and how one simple act of kindness was forcing him to reconsider everything he thought he knew about what it meant to be civilized.